how it felt preparing that sort of thing compared with being asked to prepare a presentation to the group on something, but with these particular criteria and constraints and stimuli. Did it seem? How did it feel? Did it feel different?
Felt really awkward. The reason, actually, the main reason I wanted to do it was to scare myself a little bit. I mean, like a lot of this, you could wake you up at 3 in the morning and, you know, tell me about your subject matter and that area of expertise you have. You could go on and on and on. But this was, and so I was a little bored with that and just wanted to frankly, just make use of the time here for selfish reasons in some way. But it was scary.
The time constraint makes a difference.
Yeah.
And because you have to throw things away. When
On
I
the slide,
started,
yeah.
when I started, it was half an hour, and so I have to take things out, and that does make a difference because it's a discipline. It's a tremendous discipline.
I found it very challenging. Normally, when we make a presentation, we have some prompts or could read some of it and so on. It was 18 minutes is a long time to talk. And mine started with about half an hour. I had to cut an awful lot out, and I cut a big chunk out as well today. So yes, distilling everything that you want to get across in 18 minutes is tough. It's tough.
Having listened to TED Talks, I was very inspired by people who were able to communicate a very clear idea in that time frame. And at first, I thought that it was long, and I wouldn't be able to fill the 18 minutes in any way which would make it interesting. I'd be rambling. And then when I started saying what I wanted to say, there was the concept of time. I was so taken by what I was thinking and saying that the 18 minutes, which had appeared long to me before I started, went by very, very quickly.
I found that one of the interesting things was, because it was a TED-type format, it was about trying to find a topic that extended, rather than something that I would have talked about normally otherwise, because otherwise that's an idea that's already well shared. So to find something that wasn't, was actually as much part of the challenge, and then being able to frame it in a way that might be appropriate and effective with a group. And the construct of the fact that it was also this group as well co-creating together.
A couple more things on the format. One is that when you give a normal presentation, at least I don't prepare. I don't. So this was different. I prepared for this one. And the other thing is the temptation, which I succumbed to, of inserting things at the last minute. And that's damaging because it throws you completely off. Because you still have the 18 minutes, and here you are putting things back into that bucket. So it's very tempting to do that, and at least in my case, I would not recommend it.
No, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Yes, Rachel.
Yeah, regardless of technique, I would just like to thank you very much for these beautiful gifts, because your thinking has been framed as real gems that you shared with us in a very authentic and heartfelt way, and it was quite moving in many cases. And I would like to compliment you on the poise with which you delivered your messages. Grace and poise, it was really impressive.
Thank you.
My feeling is that each of you give something about yourself, and compared to some of the presentations that we had before, I sense in listening to you a very personal connection. I had the feeling that you gave to the group something more than the usual thing that we are sharing together. So I think it was very touching. Different format, different aspect.
Just because you're right, but I think it would be unfair for us to take total credit for that. in preparing the screen sessions, we explored what TED was all about. Mike was very instrumental there. And it was clear that TED asks for a personal connection to whatever subject you develop. So that was really part of the prescription. But no, everyone was comfortable with it, but that really was something that was told to us.
The other thing, Elizabeth, because you asked about presenting, this is not a presentation, it's a performance.
And the presentation is not?
Yes, but this is different because it's a matter of emphasis, and the emphasis here is on performance. And so you're not a presenter, you're a player. And there's a dramatic quality to this that normally a presentation won't have. And there's an emotional component to this too that normally, in our settings at least, presentations don't have. So I think, even though I take your point, it's both a presentation and performance, the emphasis, I think, on these TED-type talks is performance.
Where does the emotion come from? Where does the emotion
With a
come from?
personal connection. With a personal connection. And that's when it really works. I mean, I'm not saying that, everyone gets to that point, but I think that the better TED Talks or TED-type talks or spread talks come through when there's that personal connection to the topic.
I remember from last year, Richard Olivier, as he ended each reading, almost exhausted with emotion and needing a quiet moment. And I wonder if I was observing the same thing in some of the best and hardest moments for you, and whether you shared that kind of depth of emotion that I saw him bringing out and burning up as much as anything.
I think there was some combination of, so I agree, it felt like performance. So there was this energy level that had to be generated out of that. It was very difficult because I could feel, you've all presented, right? You can kind of tell, I can feel, I say, oh no, where's the energy going here? And then there's the cognitive end of this idea that is supposed to be unique and personal, and it is personal. And so all of that combined, along with, an 18-minute, along with comparing yourself to TED people, it's just, it was more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
And even in a play, you have other characters, and you're not, in most situations, a character isn't speaking for 18 minutes continuously. So this makes it somewhat more different.
Yeah, I noticed, to answer your question, John, I learned, didn't learn, that's the wrong word, but I noticed how Richard Olivier, before he started, would just sit very quietly for about half a minute and get himself into the part before he stood up and made the performance. And I think that's perhaps, it's a big step to actually stand up there and speak off the cuff for 18 minutes. It may go in a flash, but you've got to feel some sort of passion for the subject, otherwise an awful lot of rehearsal,
And John, I was thinking, and maybe Rachel and Denis can attest to this, good teaching, if you have a good teacher, they give of themselves. And afterwards, if you notice, you may approach them with a question, but they're tired. And sometimes they want just some time for themselves. It is a performance. They're not tired while it's happening, but afterwards, they need to recuperate. Would you say that's true?
Well, sometimes I was more tired when I was bad than when I was good.
That's
true.
Frustration.
It's true athletic performances as well, isn't it? The guy who wins is sort of running around the track for another time, whereas those who lost
But
are
of course,
exhausted.
after that depends on the length of time. If you speak 2 hours, well, of course it's tiring. But probably 18 minutes can be not too tiring. I don't know.
But isn't the difference, I mean, if you are teaching, you have a subject that you can lean to. So it's sort of, you can step out of yourself in a way to sort of communicate the subject matter. But here you are supposed to give away some personal emotions. And I would assume that it's much more scary than to be a teacher during 2 hours. And then comparing to an actress, I know when they are in the theater or in a film, they use it as you used to say, they close their eyes, because they do perform best if they go into the person they're going to play out. So they sort of give up themselves and enter another person who is on the scene. But you have to give away yourself. So I could assume that is much more challenging and scary than to be an actress or being a teacher. I don't know.
Yes, but I think if you want your teaching to be interesting, you have to put something of
Yeah.
yourself in some ways. Of course,
Yeah.
maybe less than in those presentations, but in a way you have to
Yeah.
put something of yourself.
One thing I did learn is this notion of pacing and going up and down. And I'm not saying that I mastered it, but I'm just saying I'm learning it, and I'm going to practice it even more. Is this notion of pacing and rhythm, almost like a musical score, really. And that's an important element that I've never thought about in a presentation. So I'm not selling anybody to do this, but one of the things you do learn, I think, as opposed to making a presentation, is this musical notion of tonality, of rhythm, of pace, and so on and so forth. It brings another element into doing this sort of thing. And that's I think it's important. I think that's something that you can learn with a lot of practice.
And next time you'll sing it.
But next time you sing it, or tap dance it or something.
I was quite aware when I was working on mine that having made the choice to go into a space that would be in some places considered fairly dark, fairly confronting potentially for people, and not part of the usual conversation, that I had to make sure I structured it in some ways as a journey and be seen to be in a place where the outcome was okay, so that it wasn't, death served up in front of anybody, but also to put the breaks in there so that there was spaces of lightness, so that it wasn't totally heavy in it. And I mean, I actually went back to, scarily enough, back to Shakespeare, and it's the whole model of a 5-act thing. Oh, okay, so yes, there are highs and there are lows, and then there's highs and then there's lows, and then you want to get to a high, hallelujah. But that was an emotional journey that you could take from both an intellectual space and a space where, if part of what the intent was, and I decided that was the topic I chose, part of that was, if I wasn't capable of evidencing, I was still on the intellectual side, and I hadn't got there. And so to be able to be authentic in the space, I also had to go and explore means that would allow that to come through. Whereas if I had have taken a different topic choice, I wouldn't have had to have gone into that kind of thinking and analysis of how do I keep those balances in place. I mean, hence Darth Vader and the kitten at one stage.
Can we hear from Slim? Yeah, my question was, if you were to do this again, would you want to do it in more time or less time?
Well, TED structurally is 18 minutes, 12 or 6.
Really?
And people get, I've got some colleagues in Singapore who've done TED. And so they have there is a specific time in it, and that's part of the structure, being able to hold that space and the interest. And if you actually look at all the talks, there's some that are less inspirational or attractive than others. So part of it is in the structure, if we're experimenting with the structure like we did with Pechacucha, that defined a certain chunk of rules, and that defined a certain way of talking as well. So it's sort of almost for us as being the playing with different structures to experiment with your question of, if we tried it differently, what would it be like? Like the Pechacucha structure, which we've used before, totally different.
Others about the link? I'd like to ask the audience, because the speaker can just get lost and talk for an hour, and if he's taken by a subject, he doesn't even realize the hour's gone by. But for the listener, for the audience, it's very important. Are you ready to listen for 6, 8, 12 or more minutes? And is there an ideal time for you? How long can you listen? Or is it a symbiotic thing? Questions. How good is the speaker and how rested are you? But I'm putting the question back to you. How much attention span do you have?
Well, could I watch a 1.5 hour movie?
I think that's a real challenging question because I don't think for me, the time wasn't the issue. It was, I'm going to call it lack of preparation or experience with the medium. So if I did it again, I think perhaps even the same subject, I think, okay, 18 minutes. The second thought though would be maybe depending on the subject, it's how much energy. So that back to that performance thing. So if it's 6 minutes of energy relative to that subject, then it's a 6-minute talk. And I think death to try to expand it longer and boredom for you guys.
Let's keep moving from there. What surprised each of you the most out of the experience, whether while you were in the experience and or afterwards? What surprised each of you the most?
For me, it was the preparation that I did didn't match up. When you're in front of there's a different thing that happens with pacing, either slower or faster in the nature of 18 minutes, and then what I thought was going to fit didn't, and then you begin to short circuit up here because you don't know that topic as intimately. I didn't know the topic as intimately, so you had to kind of work on the fly of where you're going, and then that became difficult. So it was, so again, kind of back to how much time, now having done it in front of a crowd, I'd probably do it a little differently.
One more comment?
I think what surprised me the most was how quickly it went. But I would love to ask the question, what we should do in 18 minutes is stimulate at least one thought. And have we done that? Is there something you want to explore some more, think about some more, read about some more from each one of our presentations? If so, then I feel better. Can we ask that question?
Yes, exactly. Over to you. Because that's the purpose of these
I
sorts
think
of talks.
if I had listened to just one of them, any one of them, for sure the answer would be yes. But it's kind of avalanche of 5
Right.
strong messages. Well, I'm not sure. It's clear in my mind that I have 5 messages because all of them were quite strong and just following quickly. So I don't know what a TED session is usually. But,
It's like that. In my limited experiences, it's like that.
How many?
An avalanche of strong presentation.
Yeah.
Only you get like 2 days of it.
Mm.
I wouldn't agree because I think
Sorry.
I wouldn't agree because I think they were very they were packaged very differently, and I certainly have kept a gem from each, and I could really distinguish them in my mind, and the visuals help, of course. So
I agree with
that.
that.
The individual people that you are, I think you really get a feel for each person and their own preoccupations and their own styles. And some of the messages resonate immediately and might be things that one has seen before, but presented in your own particular way, and that really has an impact.
They had a meaning as a set. I agree with this. They went together well as a set. They're around the theme of the future and their personal views of that, and that was coherent. I found absolutely no kind of overload.
I wouldn't say avalanche at all.
But
No, it was not overload.
But TED always is a succession of strong presentations. It's a question of how it's designed.
I didn't use the word overload. It was just the answer to, do I have 5 things I want to dig into tonight? Well, probably I'm wired in a way that I can't have 5. So it's just that. But I was not overloaded.
So it's not the experience of hearing them.
Yeah, I was happy. Even at the last minute of the last 5 one, I was listening. I was okay.
Yeah.
is just the answer to the question of Richard
Thinking further.
about what I want to dig into.
Avalanche, I think you said, which would suggest you were overcome by it, as if
Which
buried
well,
by
sorry,
it.
well,
Buried.
which course, well, but it was not. Yeah, as I said, I was really present till the end. Only thing, well, that's me. It's difficult for me at the end of something to say, okay, those are 5 things I want to dig into.
Fair enough.
One or two is the maximum I can take.
But when you
But
think
maybe the 5th one will come back to my
Yes,
mind
exactly.
in 3 months. Or
exactly, yes, yes, I can remember something Joanna said. I'd like to learn more
Yeah.
about that or whatever. And yes.
Okay, others?
Now I was thinking of the sort of having pictures as a support or not, and of the TED presentations we saw up front. The woman who was talking for 18 minutes without any support made me more or less thinking of where is she coming. I was more thinking of her way of building the story and delivering the story than I was really into what she was saying actually. While comparing to the other, the next presentation, where you had a washing machine, there was a number of activities that supported the message. Was more, the 18 minutes was sort of, I was fully captured by the presentation, but the first one could for me become also delivered in 6 minutes or in 12 minutes. I still have the message, but she did dwell on it, and I was amazed how she could talk so fantastically about one thing for 18 minutes. But I think that is something to reflect on as well. Do we have tools to support or do we not? That makes the way you listen differently.
When we had our pre-call on it, Mick, who has been to quite a few of these, said that it really made a difference, that providing either props or visuals was a really good way of anchoring. Partly because, as said here, it provides a mental thing for those who are visual to go back to rather than to have to hang solely on the words. And so I think that's what your experience is saying, that yes.
But it's not a PowerPoint presentation. So
No,
it's
no, no.
finding that
No.
happy medium.
Ms. Jane?
My reflection on that is a little bit different, because I found that sometimes when the subject matter was a little more internal, you know, like the author talking about her 18 minutes and the genius, and Mason talking about the spiritual side, the values side, I didn't actually miss having pictures, but maybe it's, you know, different ways people take different topics, but something about the fact that both of them in some way were a bit more internal. Maybe that's just...
They do say, it's an old phrase, that the medium is the message, and of course the author was talking about something terribly personal. There are no pictures.
No.
So from what's coming from within inside, to have a different representation is misleading. Whereas the guy with the washing machine, with the light bulbs and the fire and so on, I mean, that all stands out because that was quantitative. I mean, I don't think he could have told that story, certainly the way he told it, which is my point, without using numbers and without using characters and without demonstrating. That was one way to tell his story, which was about billions of people in the world. So that's the concept, and that's what he described. But you were talking about something far more spiritual.
And I do agree. My question was just how long, because what you did, you also talked about sort of without any support, but you were sort of talking about, I learned something which was not just personal, but I learned some new aspects. While she was into her personal story for 80 minutes, I could have taken that message out of 6 minutes as well. I was more challenged about her way of being able to talk for 80 minutes, so with such a quality that she was.
She was a novelist. She was writing a novel.
Yeah, I know.
Or a chapter of a novel.
But I see the difference between the two, not so much as internal, external, in the sense that the professor with the washing machine, he was making a case. He was making a case, while in her, and I think that there was no discovery process for him. He knew exactly what he wanted to say, and he was making a case. And I don't mean to demean that. I accept it as such. In her case, though, I think she was going through a discovery process as she was talking. So, to me, that would be the difference between the two. Whether you are not scripted, but you're making a case for something you already know, versus you're willing to be so vulnerable that you're willing to go through a discovery process as you're giving the performance presentation. That's a big difference. That's a very big difference. They're both effective, but they're both very, very different.
I think we'll find that they both came from different TED themes as well.
Yeah.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which was not our theme particularly.
Different TED themes, meaning?
One was on ecology. The professor, I mean, it was a whole couple of days on ecology. So, but it was about the future, we're about the future, so
Yeah.
it was shoehorned.
All right, can I say where I think we are now? I think you've just done two things, and I might ask you to do two more. The first is, I think you've kind of stated in different ways that this format demands a lot of the people who presented, and they delivered, and that's impressive. So that was the first set of comments. The second thing I think I'm hearing, and I'm quite enjoying, is that your colleagues spent a lot of time and energy kind of being here for you as a support group and saying, how did that feel, and how did you do that, and why? And I find that to be remarkable, that level of support. So we can continue along that vein, or I might ask you to also think two more things. Was there anything in particular, given that there were 5 different snowstorms in the avalanche, in a way, but anything that you thought was particularly synthesis between them? Anything you thought came out as a theme, or they had in common? And the second thing, are there any points here of divergence? Is there anybody who would like to push and challenge the group or the presenters about something it didn't give to you?
So
Is that
the
mean
point
that
of
was a thread?
Let's hear Julia, then Cyril.
So the point of connectedness, or the common theme is connectedness. In what I heard and what I am attributing, and where my mental model is right now. And I can tweak or extract from each of yours connectedness to outside and inside, and somehow creating that in a more harmonious way. So that's what I'm taking away, and that's an incredible message, and it's, I hope it stays with me. I also realized that there was a need for feedback in this rigid format, and I felt rigid because I was not allowed to give it, and I felt at times that you were struggling for not being allowed to invoke it. So I wonder if I had to project a future way of spreads, what is the connected spread version that has a rehearsed, meaningful message delivery mechanism that invokes collaboration? There you go. That was 20 seconds worth.
Probably not TED.
Let's hear Cyril, and then
I think
responses.
I was exactly on the connection. For me, it's all about connection. It has a very deep spiritual level, more on the systemic level. It's all about how it says the interaction. So exactly the same feeling. So the thread was around connections. That was what I took away.
But going back to something Julie just said, and as you're giving this and knowing that you're not going to be interrupted, because that's the rules, right? It creates tremendous tension in the speaker, because at least for me, I like the give and take with the audience. I count on the give and take. So as part of the rules, that's not going to happen. So the thing that has to happen is that you have to connect in a different way. In other words, if I'm not going to have the feedback verbally, or someone shouting at me like they shouted to Obama, liar! If someone's not going to give me that kind of feedback, then I have to find another way to communicate non-verbally, etc. And I'm not saying I did that again, but I have to find that connection. Because you're right, it does create a tension because you're not getting that feedback.
Yeah, and I felt that as well. A teacher in my past life, you feed off the room, don't you?
Absolutely.
You can't do that. You feel that you've got 30 people in judgment, rather than, am I going in the right direction? Are you understanding this? And so on and so on.
Let's take a couple more comments and look for a way to come in about 5 minutes towards the end. Rick? Sorry, Rick.
Just
was,
a thought.
Is it, which one was
do you mind if Rick goes first?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think this goes a little bit to your question, Elizabeth, about presentation versus performance. If you buy a ticket to the West End, you're not sitting there thinking in the theater, I get to interrupt the performance. And if Nick made a point in the conference call that we had, he had 2 big points. One was, this is a performance. And 2, find one thought that you're trying to communicate. Those are the 2 main deliveries that he gave everybody in the call. And so inherent in performance comes, they talk, we listen, and then we applaud or something like that. So there is that element of constraint. And I sometimes I appreciate what you're saying, because I wonder if it's in part because we have so much familiarity with the people up front relationally, as opposed to going to the theater. We like their work, we don't know them, So it's an interesting question.
Perhaps extending that connectedness from them to the group, for example. Yes, Rachel?
Just a thought about commonalities between them. I picked up more on something around bridging tensions or paradox. Inside, outside, dark side, light side. I don't know, the everyday and the people coming from elsewhere. So bridging, not I suppose that means with connectedness, but bridging things that would traditionally be considered opposites or incompatible.
Just responding to Julia real quick, I think it could be a good discussion to say, well, would we do something different? I would say, though, that it was worth doing this, and it was. But I think, though, so if there are 5 more next year, my coaching would be that it's harder than it looks. I think the format deserves and needs a lot more really that because we did here it's performance, and you better drill into one spot. And I probably all of us are in the group. We're good speakers. It's what we do in a lot of ways, but it was really different. And I think that's a great challenge, though, is to get out of our comfort zone and to do something that is a bit scary and maybe build some skills and stretch our thinking a little bit. So.
All right. Jacob, did you have something to add? You just said that word scary, and it came up in at least 4 presentations and a couple of comments. It's scary dealing with fear here. And I was asking myself, what is the effect of having selected the future as the topic? Does that help push people out of that? Because then I noticed in almost all of the presentations, once again, the future has to be better. We have to break out of the linear timeline. We have to take the monochromatic eye into a multi-chrome area. Each one of them actually had something like that. So is there anything about selecting the future as the topic that made that happen?
I think it's selecting the question. Selecting the question. I think it was a good question. I mean, I wasn't here for Raphael's critique of the question, but I think
it was a linear critique.
You see, if he had been here and learned about mythical time, he wouldn't be saying those things.
Mm-hmm.
But no, honestly, I like the question. I like the question, and I think that asking that right question puts you in the right frame of mind.